The fire crackles, a fragile ward against the encroaching dark. Beyond its glow, the wilderness breathes, ancient and indifferent. You seek solace here, but what truly lurks among the shadows? Welcome, brave camper, to Nightmare True Horror. Tonight, we share 7 true tales whispered from the depths of the woods, where the silence is often more terrifying than any sound. What unseen eyes have you felt upon you in the wild? Share your own unsettling campfire confessions in the comments. And if the call of the unknown, the thrill of the terrifyingly real, draws you in, ensure you are subscribed. The wilderness has many stories to tell, and some you'll wish you never heard. Listen closely. The night is deep, and the most chilling truths often emerge when the fire burns low. The Great Smoky Mountains in Tennessee were my sanctuary, a place where the world's noise faded into the rustle of leaves and the hum of cicadas. I pitched my tent in a secluded clearing, savoring the solitude of my first solo camping trip. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp moss, and the fire I'd built crackled softly. But as I settled in that first evening in July 2024, I heard it, a faint crunch, like a twig snapping just beyond the firelight. I froze, my pulse quickening. Probably just a deer, I thought, but my eyes darted to the dark tree line. The forest was still, too still, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. What was out there, just beyond the glow? I'm Lauren, a 31-year-old nurse from Knoxville, always chasing the quiet of the outdoors to escape the chaos of the ER. I'd planned this 5-day trip to recharge, picking a remote spot off a lesser-known trail in the Smokies. No cell service, no distractions. Just me, my tent, and a backpack full of supplies. I'd camped before, but never alone, and the thrill of it felt like a small rebellion. That first day I hiked, cooked over the fire, and jotted notes in my journal, the forest wrapping me in its calm. But the next morning something was off. My campfire logs, neatly stacked the night before, were rearranged in a crisscross pattern, like someone had toyed with them. I frowned, brushing it off as wind or an animal, but unease gnawed at me. Later, I noticed my tent's zipper was slightly open, just an inch, though I was sure I'd closed it tight. I checked my gear, nothing missing, but the air felt heavier, like the forest was holding its breath. That night, as I lay in my sleeping bag, I heard it again. Soft footsteps, slow and deliberate, circling my tent. I held my breath, clutching my pocket knife. "Hello," I called, my voice thin. No answer, just a faint rustle of leaves, fading into silence. By the second day, I was jumpy. I hiked deeper into the trail, hoping distance would shake the feeling of being watched, but small things kept piling up. A boot print in the mud near my tent, too large to be mine, its edges fresh. A single stone, smooth and gray, placed dead center on my sleeping bag when I returned from a stream. My mind raced. Was I imagining this? I'd read about campers getting spooked, their minds playing tricks. But when I found my water bottle moved from my pack to a nearby stump, I couldn't ignore it. Someone was here, messing with me, and the forest no longer felt like a refuge. On the third night, I barely slept, my ears straining for every sound. The footsteps returned, closer this time, circling tighter. I gripped my knife, my heart hammering so loud I thought it'd give me away. Then I heard a new sound, a soft, rhythmic scratching, like something being dragged across the dirt. At dawn, I unzipped my tent, my hands shaking, and saw it. A crude map scratched into the earth outside, lines and arrows pointing deeper into the woods. My stomach churned. It wasn't random. It was deliberate, like an invitation. I packed up, deciding to hike out early. Whoever this was, I wasn't sticking around to meet them. As I broke camp, I noticed my knife was gone from my pack. I'd left it by the fire the night before, and now it was just gone. Panic clawed at me, but I slung my bag over my shoulder and started down the trail. The map's image burned into my mind. The forest was suffocating now, the trees looming like silent witnesses. Every snap of a branch made me flinch, my eyes scanning the underbrush. Then I saw him, a figure, maybe 100 yards off, half hidden among the pines. He was tall, lean, his face shadowed by a hood, and in his hand glinted something metallic, my knife. His head tilted, like he was studying me, and I felt his gaze like a weight. I turned and ran, my boots pounding the dirt. The trail twisted downhill, roots snagging at my feet. My breath burned, but I could hear him behind me. Footsteps, steady and unhurried, like he knew these woods better than I did. My mind screamed. Was he hurting me somewhere? The map? Had it been a trap? I ducked behind a boulder, gasping, and peeked out. He was closer now, maybe 50 yards, moving with a predator's calm. His jacket was tattered, streaked with dirt, and his eyes, when they caught the light, were cold, empty. I bolted again, my pack bouncing painfully, branches tearing at my arms. A low whistle cut through the air, sharp and mocking, raising the hairs on my neck. I stumbled into a ravine, the ground slick with leaves. My ankle twisted, pain shooting up my leg, but I kept moving. The whistle came again, closer, and I heard him call out, his voice low and gravelly. "You're going the wrong way." My blood ran cold. He was playing with me, enjoying the chase. I scrambled up the other side of the ravine, my hands scraping rock, and saw a ranger trail marker ahead. Hope surged, but as I reached it, I froze. Another map, scratched into a tree trunk, identical to the one by my tent, with an X marking a spot just off the path. I didn't look back. I ran, praying for a road, a ranger, anything. The trail opened to a gravel road, and I sprinted toward a distant ranger station, its lights faint in the dusk. My lungs burned, my ankle throbbing, but I didn't stop until I was pounding on the door. A ranger. Sarah, let me in, her face creasing with concern as I spilled everything. The footsteps, the map, the man. She radioed for help, locking the door behind us. Hours later, state police searched the area. They found my knife, buried blade up in the dirt near the ravine, and tracks leading to a makeshift camp. Ropes, a tattered sleeping bag, and photos of campers, some with faces scratched out. They think he was a drifter, a loner who'd been stalking the Smokies for years, targeting solo campers to feel powerful, in control. They never caught him. I haven't been back to the Smokies. The forest, once my escape, feels like a cage now. I moved to a new apartment, got a dog, and started therapy. But the fear lingers. Sarah checks in sometimes, her voice steady but guarded, like she knows something she's not saying. I still see that map in my dreams, its lines twisting like veins, leading to a place I never want to find. The police say he's probably gone, moved on to another park, another trail. But sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I hear a faint whistle outside my window, sharp and deliberate, and I wonder if he's still drawing his maps, waiting for me to follow. The silence was the first thing that felt wrong. Not the peaceful quiet of nature, but a heavy, watchful stillness that pressed against my eardrums. We'd been hiking for hours through the dense Ozark forest, our boots crunching on fallen leaves, the late September air crisp with the promise of autumn. The trail had gradually narrowed, becoming less defined with each mile, until Lisa pointed out we hadn't seen a trail marker in over an hour. "I think we missed a turn somewhere," she said, brushing a strand of hair from her face as she studied our worn map. Her voice sounded unnaturally loud in the quiet woods. That's when I noticed it, a faint impression in the soft earth ahead of us. Tire tracks, fresh enough that the edges hadn't yet crumbled. They cut through the underbrush, winding deeper into the forest where no vehicle should be. "Maybe it's a ranger," I suggested, though we both knew park rangers stuck to established roads. The tracks led us to a small clearing, flat enough for camping, but unmarked on any trail map. The ground was disturbed with patches of grass freshly flattened. Someone had been here recently. Very recently. Very recently. "Let's head back," Lisa whispered, her fingers tightening around mine, until I felt her nails dig into my skin. I don't like this. But the sun was already sinking behind the mountains, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples. We'd never make it back to our car before dark. With reluctance, we decided to set up camp, promising ourselves we'd leave at first light. My name is Daniel, and until that weekend in the Ozarks, I'd always felt at home in the wilderness. Lisa and I had been together for 3 years, and our shared love of hiking had taken us to trails across the country. We were experienced, careful, and always prepared. This trip was supposed to be a celebration of our engagement. 3 days of disconnecting from the world and reconnecting with each other. We'd chosen a remote section of the Ozark Mountains, drawn by its reputation for pristine forests and challenging trails. The first day had been perfect. Crystal clear streams, vibrant fall colors, and the kind of silence that soothes the soul. But now, as darkness fell on that unmarked clearing, the silence felt malevolent. As I hammered the last tent stake into the ground, a twig snapped in the woods behind us. I turned, scanning the tree line, but saw nothing except shadows stretching between the pines. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of eyes tracking our movements from the darkness. "Did you hear that?" I asked Lisa, trying to keep my voice casual. She nodded, her face pale in the fading light. Probably just a deer. But we both knew deer don't snap twigs like that. Not with such deliberate timing. As we cooked dinner on our portable stove, I noticed more details that set my nerves on edge. The tire tracks weren't from a single vehicle. There were at least 2 different treads pressed into the earth, and near the edge of the clearing, partially hidden by fallen leaves, was what looked like a fire pit. Recent, the ashes still black rather than gray. "Someone's been camping here," I said quietly, nodding toward the pit. Lisa followed my gaze, her forehead creasing with concern. "Maybe hunters? In this part of the park?" "It's not hunting season yet." We ate quickly, the food tasteless in my mouth. Every few minutes, I'd scan the perimeter of our campsite, straining to see through the gathering darkness. The forest seemed to close in around us, the trees forming a wall that trapped us in the clearing. After dinner, we retreated to our tent, zipping ourselves into what felt like false security. Lisa curled against me, her body tense. "I keep feeling like someone's watching us," she whispered, her breath warm against my neck. I wanted to reassure her, to tell her it was just her imagination. But I felt it too, that prickling awareness of being observed. I tightened my arm around her. "We'll leave at first light," I promised. "Just a few hours." We lay in silence, listening to the night sounds, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl, the soft sigh of wind through the trees. Normal sounds that should have been comforting, but somehow weren't. I must have dozed off, because the next thing I knew, Lisa was shaking me awake, her hand clamped over my mouth. "Listen," she breathed, her eyes wide with fear. At first I heard nothing. Then it came. The low rumble of an engine, growing louder as it approached our clearing. Headlights swept across the fabric of our tent, illuminating the interior in harsh white light before plunging us back into darkness. The engine cut off, and the sound of car doors opening and closing echoed through the night. "You sure this is the place?" a man's voice asked, low and gravelly. "Yeah, this is it. Saw him set up camp here earlier," another voice replied. "A couple. Young." My blood turned to ice. They were talking about us. They had been watching us. "What do we do?" Lisa mouthed, her face pale in the dim light filtering through the tent. I pressed a finger to my lips, my mind racing. We couldn't stay in the tent. We'd be trapped. But running blindly into the dark forest wasn't much better. The voices grew closer, accompanied by the crunch of boots on leaves. "Nice tent," the first voice said, now alarmingly close. "Expensive. Let's see who's home," the second voice replied, followed by a sound that made my heart stop. The unmistakable click of a rifle being chambered. In that moment, survival instinct took over. I grabbed our small backpack, stuffed in my phone and water bottle, and gestured for Lisa to follow me to the back of the tent, moving as silently as possible, I used my pocket knife to slice a small opening in the fabric. We slipped through just as the beam of a flashlight illuminated the front of our tent. "Hello there," one of the men called out, his voice falsely friendly. "Just checking on you folks." We knew they weren't rangers. No ranger would approach a campsite like this, in the middle of the night, armed. Crouching low, we made our way to the edge of the clearing, the darkness of the forest offering temporary concealment. From our hiding spot behind a fallen log, I could see them clearly now. Two men, one tall and lean, the other stockier. The taller one held a hunting rifle, while the other swept a powerful flashlight across our campsite. "Empty," the stocky one said, sounding disappointed as he unzipped our tent. "But still warm. They can't be far." "Spread out," the tall one ordered. "Check the woods. They must have heard us coming." My heart hammered against my ribs as they began to search the perimeter of the clearing. Lisa's fingers dug into my arm, her breath coming in short, silent gasps. We needed to move, but any sound might give us away. As the beam of the flashlight swept dangerously close to our hiding spot, I made a split-second decision. Picking up a rock, I threw it as far as I could in the opposite direction. It crashed through the underbrush, drawing both men's attention. "There!" the stocky one shouted, and they took off toward the sound. "Now," I whispered, and we ran, staying low, moving as quickly and quietly as we could through the dark forest. We didn't stop until the sounds of pursuit had faded, replaced by the hammering of our own hearts and the rasp of our breathing. We'd found a dense thicket, the branches forming a natural shelter that hid us from view. There, we huddled together, listening intently for any sign of the men. Hours passed, each minute stretching into eternity. The cold seeped into our bones, and every snapping twig or rustling leaf sent fresh waves of terror through us. Lisa trembled against me, whether from cold or fear, I couldn't tell. Probably both. "Who are they?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. I shook my head. "I don't know. But they were looking for us specifically. They watched us set up camp. What do they want?" The question hung in the air, unanswered but understood. In the isolated wilderness, there were countless possibilities, none of them good. Dawn broke slowly, the darkness giving way to a gray, misty morning. We waited until full light before cautiously making our way back toward the clearing. Each step was measured, each sound analyzed for danger. The forest felt different in daylight, less threatening but no less watchful. As we approached the edge of the clearing, I held out an arm to stop Lisa. Something was wrong. Our tent was still there, but it looked different. The front flap open, the contents scattered across the ground, and our backpacks, which had contained our food, extra clothing, and most importantly, our car keys, were gone. "They took our stuff," Lisa whispered, her voice tight with fear. But that wasn't what made my blood run cold. Near our tent, pressed clearly into the soft earth, was a single boot print, large, with a distinctive tread pattern. It hadn't been there the night before. It was facing toward the forest, toward the direction we had fled. "They know we're still out here," I said quietly. "They're hunting us." We retreated back into the forest, moving as quietly as possible. We had to find help, but the nearest ranger station was miles away. And without the map in our backpack, I wasn't entirely sure of the direction. All we had was my phone, with no signal, a half-empty water bottle, and the clothes on our backs. For hours, we hiked through unfamiliar terrain, constantly looking over our shoulders. Every sound made us freeze. Every distant crack or rustle sent us diving for cover. The forest that had once seemed so beautiful now felt like a vast trap, with us as the prey. Around midday, we heard it, the rumble of an engine, somewhere in the distance. We dropped to the ground, pressing ourselves into the earth as the sound grew closer. Through the trees, I caught glimpses of a truck moving slowly along a dirt road we hadn't known existed. It was them, patrolling, searching. "They're not giving up," Lisa whispered, her face streaked with dirt and tears. As the truck passed out of sight, I made a decision. We need to follow that road, but at a distance. It has to lead somewhere. We shadowed the dirt road for miles, staying within the tree line, out of sight. The day wore on, the sun beginning its descent toward the horizon. Our water was gone, our legs aching from the constant movement, but the alternative, being found by those men, kept us going. Just as the light began to fade, we saw it, a main road with actual pavement. And in the distance, the outline of buildings, civilization, safety. We waited until dark before leaving the cover of the forest, then ran along the shoulder of the road toward the small cluster of buildings that turned out to be a gas station and diner. As we burst through the door, dirty, exhausted, and wild-eyed, the few patrons turned to stare. "Please," I gasped to the startled cashier. "We need help. We need to call the police." The local sheriff arrived within 20 minutes. We told him everything. The unmarked campsite, the men with the rifle, our night hiding in the forest. He listened gravely, taking notes, his expression growing more concerned as our story unfolded. "You folks are lucky," he said finally. "We've had reports of robberies in that area. Hikers being targeted, their gear stolen. But some cases," he hesitated, choosing his words carefully, "some cases have been worse. He sent deputies to search the area. But by the time they reached our campsite, there was nothing left. No tent, no scattered gear, no boot print. Even the fire pit had been covered over. It was as if we had never been there at all. We stayed in a local motel that night, jumping at every sound, checking and rechecking the locks on the door and windows. The next day, the sheriff drove us back to our car, which thankfully was still where we'd left it at the trailhead. Our spare key, hidden under the bumper, got us home. But home didn't feel safe anymore. For weeks, I startled at unexpected noises. I installed new locks, a security system. I checked the windows repeatedly before bed. Lisa and I broke up 2 months later. The shared trauma had created a rift between us that we couldn't bridge. She moved to Chicago, as far from the wilderness as she could get. I haven't been hiking since. Sometimes when I'm driving on a lonely stretch of road, I check my rearview mirror more often than necessary, half expecting to see a truck following me. I wonder if those men are still out there, still hunting in the wilderness. I wonder if they remember us, the couple that got away. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I find myself wondering why they let us live. Why they left that single boot print facing our escape route. It wasn't just a signature, it was a message. They knew we were watching. They knew we'd come back. They wanted us to know they could have found us if they'd really wanted to. That's the thought that keeps me awake at night. Not that we narrowly escaped, but that maybe we were allowed to escape. And I can't shake the feeling that somewhere, in those quiet Ozark woods, they're still waiting, watching, hunting, waiting for someone else to take a wrong turn. The whispered argument drifted through the thin nylon walls of my tent at 2:17 a.m., barely audible over the Sierra Nevada wind rustling through the pines. 2 voices, maybe 3, engaged in what sounded like a heated discussion about 50 yards from my campsite. I lay perfectly still in my sleeping bag, straining to make out words, but the voices were too distant and muffled, probably just other backpackers having a late-night disagreement. It happens when people are tired, stressed, and sleeping rough in the wilderness. But something about the tone made my skin crawl. One voice sounded angry, insistent. The other seemed to be pleading. When I unzipped my tent flap and stepped into the cold mountain air, the voices stopped immediately, as if someone had thrown a switch. The forest fell silent, except for the whisper of wind through pine needles and the distant trickle of a creek. My flashlight beam swept the surrounding area, illuminating nothing but trees, granite boulders, and the scattered remnants of an old campfire ring. No tents, no people, no sign that anyone else had been here recently. Recently? Who stops talking the instant they hear a tent zipper? I'm Alex Chen, a 31-year-old data analyst from San Francisco, and I'd been solo backpacking in the Sierra Nevada for 6 years. This particular trip was a much-needed escape from a brutal divorce and the stress of starting over in a new apartment. 5 days alone in the Ansel Adams wilderness, just me and the mountains. I'd chosen this campsite near Thousand Island Lake specifically for its isolation. 3 miles off the main John Muir Trail, accessible only by a faint use trail that most hikers missed. In 24 hours, I'd seen exactly 0 other people, so who had I heard talking? The next morning, I searched the area more carefully. No footprints except my own, no camping gear, no trash or evidence that anyone else had been there. I was starting to think I dreamed the whole thing when I found something that made my blood run cold. Carved into a pine tree about 30 feet from my tent were 4 words, the letters fresh and white against the dark bark. Welcome to my home. The carving looked recent. Wood shavings were still scattered at the base of the tree, and the exposed wood hadn't had time to darken. Someone had carved this while I was sleeping, close enough to my tent that they could have reached out and touched the fabric. I packed up immediately and hiked to a different campsite 5 miles away, convinced I'd stumbled into some local secret spot. Territorial weirdos weren't uncommon in remote areas. People who thought they owned pieces of public land and didn't appreciate visitors. But that night, the voices returned. This time they were closer, maybe 20 feet from my tent, and I could make out fragments of conversation. One voice, male, gravelly, with a slight accent I couldn't place, seemed to be giving instructions. The other voice was softer, harder to distinguish. Checked the perimeter twice. No other campers for miles. Been watching since yesterday. Knows the routine. My heart hammered against my ribs as I listened. They were talking about me. About watching me. I grabbed my flashlight and burst from the tent, shouting, I can hear you. I know you're out there. Silence. Empty forest. Nothing but shadows and the cold mountain air. But this time, I noticed something else. The faint green glow of what looked like an electronic device, disappearing behind a boulder about 40 yards away. Was I overreacting? I wondered as I lay awake the rest of the night, jumping at every sound. Maybe I was just spooked, reading malice into innocent sounds. Mountain acoustics could be weird. Voices carried strange distances, echoing off granite faces in unexpected ways. But that green light hadn't been my imagination. The third night, the voices got personal. I ate those protein bars for lunch, the peanut butter ones. Took the North Trail to the lake, stopped at the granite overlook for 20 minutes, writing in that little notebook every evening, documenting everything. They knew what I'd eaten. They knew where I'd hiked. They knew about my journal. Someone had been watching me all day, tracking my movements with the precision of a surveillance team. The realization sent terror shooting through my veins like ice water. I was 3 days into a 5-day solo trip, miles from the nearest road, with no cell service and no way to call for help. And someone, maybe multiple people, had been stalking me since I arrived. The 4th night, they said my name. Alex went to bed early tonight. Lights out at 9:30. Alex doesn't know we're here. Thinks it's just voices in the wind. Alex can't leave. Not yet. Not until we're finished. Hearing my name spoken by strangers in the darkness was my name spoken by strangers in the darkness was the most terrifying sound I'd ever experienced. These people knew who I was. They'd been planning something, and I was the target. I reached for my phone to try recording the voices, hands shaking so badly I could barely work the controls. The voices continued, discussing my hiking route, my gear, even personal details about my recent divorce that they couldn't possibly know unless they'd been watching me for longer than just this trip. The recording ran for 12 minutes, capturing every word of their conversation about me, my habits, my vulnerabilities. When the voices finally faded away, I felt a mixture of terror and relief. I had evidence, proof that this wasn't just my imagination. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat with my back against a tree, knife in one hand, flashlight in the other, waiting for dawn. As soon as there was enough light to hike safely, I broke camp and headed for the trailhead. Every shadow could hide a watcher. Every sound could be footsteps. The 5-mile hike felt like 50, and I didn't stop moving until I reached my car. The drive back to civilization was a blur of adrenaline and paranoia. I kept checking my mirrors, convinced I was being followed, but saw nothing suspicious. At the first cell tower, I called 911 and reported what had happened. The dispatcher took my information and promised to alert the local sheriff's department. but I could hear the skepticism in her voice. Camper reports weird voices in the woods. Probably just some kids partying, or a case of wilderness anxiety. But I had proof. I had the recording. Back in my San Francisco apartment, I connected my phone to my laptop and pulled up the audio file, ready to document evidence of what had been, without question, the most terrifying experience of my life. The file was 12 minutes and 37 seconds of absolute silence. I played it 3 times, turning the volume all the way up, but heard nothing except the faint electronic hiss of digital recording. No voices, no conversations, no evidence that anyone had been there. It was as if the audio had been wiped clean. I stared at the silent waveform on my computer screen, my mind reeling. How was this possible? I'd heard those voices clearly, recorded them directly. The technology to selectively erase audio was sophisticated, requiring specialized equipment and technical expertise. Who had the capability to monitor my phone, intercept my recordings, and erase evidence remotely? And more importantly, who had I really encountered in those mountains? 3 months later, I still don't have answers. The sheriff's department found no evidence of illegal camping or suspicious activity in the area. No other hikers reported strange encounters. No missing persons cases matched the voices I'd heard. But sometimes, late at night in my apartment, I get the distinct feeling that someone is listening, watching, waiting. My laptop camera has a piece of tape over it now. I've changed all my passwords, switched phone carriers, even moved to a different apartment. But I can't shake the feeling that whoever was in those mountains, whoever has the technology to erase audio files and track people's movements with military precision, isn't just some random wilderness stalker. They're still out there, still watching, and then they know exactly where to find me. You shouldn't have touched our things. The voice was flat, cold as the steel of the hunting knife he was holding, and it cut through the sudden, unnatural silence of the woods like a razor. That, and the way the birds had stopped singing about 10 minutes before we even found the campsite. That was the first real warning. My name is Emily. My boyfriend Chris and I are avid hikers. Nothing extreme, just weekend warriors trying to escape the city grind. We were up in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, a crisp early fall weekend, tackling a trail called Bear Paw Loop. It's moderately challenging, known for its dense woods and relative seclusion. We were about 3 hours in, deep into a section where the trail markers had become a little sparse, the forest floor thick with fallen leaves. The first subtle sign of trouble, the thing that pricked the edge of my unease, was a sound. Or rather, a lack of it, then a strange one. 1 minute, the woods were alive with the usual chatter of squirrels and chickadees. The next, dead quiet. Then a single odd bird call, a sort of high-pitched, drawn-out whistle, followed by 2 sharp clicks. It didn't sound like any bird I knew. Chris, ever the pragmatist, shrugged. Probably a blue jay messing around. But a few minutes later, we heard it again. Closer this time, almost like it was paralleling our path. I remember a shiver going down my spine. Was it just my imagination, or did the woods suddenly feel watchful? We pushed on, trying to ignore the growing sense of unease. The trail seemed to peter out near a small, unnamed stream. As we were consulting our map, arguing good-naturedly about which way to go, Chris pointed. "Hey, look! Smoke!" A thin tendril of gray smoke was curling up through the trees about 50 yards off what we thought was the trail. "Someone's camping," he said. "Maybe they know if this is still Bear Paw." Curiosity, and the hope of reorienting ourselves, pulled us towards it. We pushed through a thicket of ferns and stumbled into a small, hastily made campsite. A fire pit, with embers still glowing faintly, a thin plume of smoke rising from it. A newer-looking expensive sleeping bag, unrolled and discarded haphazardly beside it. A half-eaten can of beans, a dented canteen, fresh supplies, energy bars, a water filter, a small first aid kit were spread out on a ground sheet. But no people. It looked like someone had just stepped away for a minute. "Hello," Chris called out. his voice a little too loud in the sudden quiet. Anyone here? Silence. Only the faint crackle of the dying fire. The place felt wrong. The supplies looked too new, too organized for a casual camper who just wandered off. And the sleeping bag, it looked like it had been thrown aside in a hurry. A metallic, coppery scent, very faint, hung in the air near the fire pit. "This is weird," I whispered, my eyes scanning the dense tree line surrounding the small clearing. Where did they go? Chris, more curious than cautious, knelt by the fire, poking at the embers with a stick. He picked up the discarded canteen. "Still has water in it." He then noticed a small, leather-bound notebook lying half hidden under the sleeping bag. He reached for it. That's when we heard it. The voice. "You shouldn't have touched our things." We both froze. It came from the trees, just beyond the clearing. Cold, flat, devoid of any emotion. We slowly turned. 2 men were emerging from the dense undergrowth, moving with a silent, unnerving grace. They were dressed in dark, practical woodsman's clothing. Their faces hard, weathered, their eyes like chips of ice. Each of them held a large, well-used hunting knife, the blades glinting dully in the filtered sunlight. They weren't smiling. My heart hammered against my ribs. We thought you were lost," Chris stammered, dropping the canteen. His hands held up in a placating gesture. "We were just checking if everything was okay." "Everything was fine," the taller of the 2 men said, his gaze flicking from Chris to me, then to the notebook Chris had almost picked up. "Until you started poking around where you don't belong." The other men, shorter, stockier, just stared. His silence somehow more menacing. "This is a public trail, isn't it?" I asked, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "Bear paw loop," the tall man let out a short, humorless laugh. "Not anymore, it ain't. This is our camp. Our supplies." He took a step closer. The coppery scent was stronger now, mixed with the smell of wood smoke and something else. Something like fear. "And we don't like uninvited guests. Look, we're sorry," Chris said quickly. "We didn't mean to intrude. We'll be on our way." "Oh, I don't think so," the tall man said, his eyes narrowing. "You've seen our camp. You've seen our things." He gestured with his knife towards the woods behind them. "We're very particular about our privacy out here. Can't have folks just stumbling onto our operations." "Operations? What operations?" My mind raced. Poachers? Moonshiners? Or something worse? The way they looked at us. The deadness in their eyes. This wasn't just about trespassing. The shorter man took a step to the side, subtly cutting off our easiest path of retreat back towards where we thought the trail was. "We were trapped. What do you want?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The tall man smiled then, a slow, predatory stretching of his lips. "Well, now that you are here, maybe you can help us with a little project we were working on. We could always use an extra pair of hands. Or 2. He looked at Chris, then at me, his gaze lingering in a way that made my skin crawl. The project, I had a sickening feeling, wasn't about building anything. Panic, cold and absolute, flooded through me. There was no talking our way out of this. These men weren't just angry campers. They were dangerous. Their motive wasn't just privacy. It was something far more sinister. Something they were willing to protect with those gleaming knives. In that split second, as the tall man took another step, Chris did something I'll never forget. He yelled, a roar, primal sound, and threw the heavy stick he'd been poking the fire with directly at the man's face. It was a desperate, clumsy move, but it caught him by surprise. The man staggered back, cursing, momentarily blinded. "Run! Emily, blinded! Run!" Chris screamed, shoving me towards the dense woods in the opposite direction of the shorter man. I ran harder than I'd ever run in my life, crashing through undergrowth, branches whipping at my face. The sounds of a struggle, shouts, grunts, the sickening thud of something heavy hitting flesh, echoing behind me. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just ran, fueled by terror and a desperate, selfish hope. I don't know how long I ran, or in what direction. The woods were a green, terrifying blur. Eventually, by some miracle, I stumbled onto a wider, more established logging road. I followed it for what felt like an eternity, until, bruised, scratched, and sobbing, I reached a main highway and flagged down a passing car. The police, the park rangers, they mounted a search. They found the campsite, just as I had described it, the smoldering fire, the discarded supplies. But the men, the knives, the notebook, all gone, vanished. They found Chris about 100 yards from the campsite near the stream. He was alive, barely, beaten, bound with rough rope, but alive. He said after I ran, they'd overpowered him quickly. They hadn't said much, just kept asking what we'd seen, what we knew. Then he'd heard distant sirens, my rescuers presumably, and they just melted back into the forest, leaving him there. They never caught them. The official theory was that we'd stumbled upon an illegal poaching camp, or maybe a remote drug operation. Highly territorial, the lead ranger had called them, and very dangerous. The strange bird calls we'd heard, likely signals between them, a way of tracking us or luring us in. We were lucky, so incredibly lucky. Chris recovered mostly, but the scars, physical and mental, remain. Bear Paw Loop is still on the maps of the White Mountains, but for us, it's a place of profound darkness. A reminder that the wilderness holds more than just beauty and solitude. It holds secrets, and sometimes those secrets are guarded by men with cold eyes and sharp knives, who don't appreciate trespassers. And I know, with a certainty that still chills me to the bone, that they're still out there, in those deep, silent woods. Their fire still smoldering, waiting for the next curious hikers to touch their things. The metallic scraping sound against my driver's side window pulled me from sleep at 3:47 a.m. Slow, deliberate, like someone testing whether the glass would break under pressure. I lay perfectly still in the back seat of my Honda Civic, my heart hammering as the sound moved methodically around my car. Through the condensation on the windows, I could make out a dark silhouette pressing against the glass, trying each door handle with quiet, practiced movements. Someone was trying to get inside. The campsite I'd chosen was deliberately isolated, a primitive spot 20 miles up a Forest Service road in the North Cascades, where cell service died, and the nearest human being was probably 40 miles away. Perfect for the solo camping trip I'd planned after my recent layoff from Microsoft. But now that isolation felt like a trap. I'm Rachel Morrison, a 26-year-old software developer, and I'd been camping alone since college. The Cascades were my refuge, a place where I could think clearly without the noise of Seattle traffic and the stress of job hunting. Yesterday afternoon, driving up Highway 20 toward my chosen campsite, I'd seen him standing on the shoulder about 15 miles from nowhere, a man in hiking gear with his thumb out, looking stranded and harmless. He was maybe 35, medium build, with the kind of weathered face you'd expect from someone who spent a lot of time outdoors. When I pulled over, his smile seemed genuine, grateful. Car broke down about 5 miles back, he'd said, climbing into my passenger seat. I'm trying to get to the Cascade River trailhead. You're a lifesaver. But during the 20-minute drive, his questions had felt wrong. Too personal, too probing. You camping alone? He'd asked, studying my gear in the back seat. Something in his tone made me lie. No, meeting friends at the site. They went ahead yesterday. Ah, he'd said. But I caught him smirking in my peripheral vision. Lucky you. These mountains can be dangerous for someone alone. When I dropped him at what he claimed was his destination, he'd lingered by my car window longer than necessary, asking about my route, how long I planned to stay, whether I'd be hiking the same trails. Thanks again, he'd said finally. Maybe I'll see you around. There was something in the way he said it that made my skin crawl. Now, 12 hours later, he was outside my car with what looked like a crowbar in his hand. I reached slowly for my keys, trying not to make any noise that would alert him to the fact that I was awake. The scraping moved to the rear window, then the passenger side. Through a small gap in the condensation, I saw his face clearly for the first time since dropping him off. He wasn't the stranded hiker anymore. His expression was cold, calculating, predatory. He was enjoying this. When the scraping stopped, I held my breath and counted to 60 before starting the engine. The Honda roared to life, and I threw it in reverse, gravel spraying as I backed away from the campsite at dangerous speed. In my headlight beams, I caught a glimpse of him standing where my car had been, crowbar raised, his face twisted with rage at being denied his prey. I drove without stopping until I reached the highway, my hands shaking so badly I could barely steer. At the first gas station with cell service, I called 911. But what could I tell them? A man tried to break into my car at a remote campsite. By the time police reached the area, he'd be long gone. It wasn't until I got home to Seattle that I made the discovery that still gives me nightmares. While unpacking my camping gear, I found a folded piece of paper tucked into the side pocket of my backpack. A pocket I never used, one that could only be accessed if someone unzipped it deliberately. Written on the paper in neat block letters were the exact coordinates of my campsite. Not the general area, not the Forest Service road. The precise GPS coordinates of the specific spot where I'd pitched my tent. He'd known exactly where I was going before I'd even picked him up. The Hitchhiker story had been a lie. The broken down car had been a lie. He'd researched my route somehow, positioned himself on the highway at the perfect spot to intercept me, and planted those coordinates in my gear while I wasn't looking. This wasn't a random crime of opportunity. It was a carefully planned abduction. I called the police again with this new evidence, and they took it more seriously. The detective who handled my case told me they'd been tracking similar reports across the Pacific Northwest. Solo female campers who'd encountered helpful, friendly strangers on remote roads, only to have those same strangers show up at their stash campsites hours later. "You're lucky," Detective Stevens said. "We've had 3 women go missing in the past 18 months. Same pattern, remote locations, evidence of forced entry into vehicles, no witnesses. They never caught him." Despite a multi-state investigation and warnings posted at every trailhead in the region, the Cascade Hitchhiker, as the media dubbed him, vanished like he'd never existed. But I know he's still out there somewhere, standing on lonely stretches of highway with his thumb out, waiting for the next solo traveler who's kind enough to stop. The worst part isn't the memory of his face pressed against my car window, or the terror of that night in the mountains. It's the knowledge that he's probably perfected his technique by now, and wondering how many drivers didn't make it to the highway to tell their story. "No one's coming for you." The words were a whisper, cold and flat, slicing through the sudden, unnatural silence of the deep woods. That, and the way his smile never quite reached his eyes, even as he offered us a canteen of water. That was when the hope we'd clung to for hours finally curdled into a raw, primal fear. "My name is Chloe. My boyfriend, Mark, and I are experienced hikers. We spend most of our free weekends exploring the backcountry trails of the Sierra Nevada. Last fall, we decided to tackle a remote, lesser-used section of the High Ridge Trail, a challenging multi-day trek. We were deep in the wilderness, miles from any road. Our only company, the rustling leaves and the occasional startled deer. The first subtle sign that our carefully planned trip was about to go sideways was a sound. Late on the 3rd afternoon, as we were making camp by a small, unnamed alpine lake, I heard it. A faint, metallic clink, 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 like someone tapping rocks together, or maybe loose gear on a backpack. It was distant, carried on the wind. Mark didn't hear it. Probably just the wind chimes from that weird art installation back at the trailhead, he'd said, though we were a good 20 miles past that now. I tried to shake it off, but a little seed of unease had been planted. Later, as dusk settled, I was gathering firewood when I saw it. A flicker of movement high on the ridge overlooking our campsite. A dark shape against the darkening sky, too large for a deer, too still for a bear. It vanished as soon as I focused on it. Was it just my eyes playing tricks in the fading light, or were we not as alone out here as we thought? The next morning, we woke to a thick, disorienting fog. The trail markers, already sparse in this section, became impossible to find. We consulted our map, our compass, but after a few hours of pushing through dense undergrowth, backtracking and arguing in hushed, anxious tones, we had to admit it, we were lost. Seriously lost. The kind of lost where every tree looks the same and a cold dread starts to seep into your bones. Our cell phones, predictably, had no service. That's when Mark remembered the emergency beacon, the PLB we carried for dire situations. This felt dire, with a grim look. He activated it. The small device let out a series of beeps, its tiny light blinking. A fragile beacon of hope in the vast, indifferent wilderness. We made a small, smoky fire, huddled together, trying to stay warm and visible, straining our ears for the sound of a rescue helicopter. Hours passed. The fog began to thin a little, but the silence of the woods pressed in, heavy and unnerving. Then, through the trees, we heard voices, not the organized shouts of a search and rescue team, but lower, more conversational. 3 men emerged from the woods, dressed in mismatched hiking gear, faded camo pants, old flannel shirts, worn boots. They weren't wearing any official SAR insignia, no bright orange vests. One was older, with a grizzled beard and hard, watchful eyes. The other 2 were younger, wiry, their faces smudged with dirt. "Saw your smoke," the older one said, his voice a low rumble. "You folks lost?" "We're volunteer SAR, out on a training exercise. Heard a beacon got activated in this sector. Relief washed over us, so potent it almost buckled my knees." "Yes, oh my God, yes, we're lost," I blurted out. "Our PLB. Good thing you had it," the older man said, nodding. He offered us a canteen. Water. We drank gratefully. They seemed friendly enough, asked us where we'd started, how long we'd been lost. Their story about being volunteer SAR on a training exercise seemed plausible. This was remote country. But then, the unsettling details started to surface. Their gear, what little they had, looked old, almost makeshift. No radios, no GPS units visible. None of the standard equipment you'd expect. When Mark asked which SAR unit they were affiliated with, the older man got a little vague, mumbled something about a local backcountry response group. The 2 younger men just watched us, their eyes flat, unreadable. "Best if we get you moving," the older man said after a while. "Storm's supposed to roll in later. We know a shortcut back to the ranger station on the north side." He pointed in a direction that felt wrong, different from where we thought the nearest station was. "Our phones are dead," Mark said. "Do you guys have a satellite phone so we can let our families know we're okay?" The 3 men exchanged a quick, almost imperceptible glance. "No need for that yet," the older one said, his voice a little too smooth. "We'll get you to a landline soon enough. But first, just for safety protocol, we should probably hold onto your phones and that beacon. Don't want any conflicting signals confusing the main SAR team if they're still looking." That's when the real alarm bell started screaming in my head. "Take our phones? Our beacon?" That wasn't standard protocol. That was control. I think we'll hang on to them," Mark said, his voice firming, his hand instinctively going to the PLB clipped to his pack. The older man's smile didn't change, but his eyes hardened. "Son," he said, his voice losing its friendly tone, "we're trying to help you. Standard procedure. Don't make this difficult." One of the younger men, the one with a long, jagged scar above his eyebrow, took a step closer. I saw the handle of a large hunting knife tucked into his belt. "We're not giving you our phones," I said, my voice trembling despite my resolve. The older man sighed, a theatrical sound of disappointment. He looked from me to Mark, then back to me. That's when he leaned in, his voice dropping to that chilling whisper. "No one's coming for you." He paused, letting the words sink in. "The beacon signal. Way rerouted it. The Rangers think you're 20 miles south of here, heading towards the old Miller Creek trailhead. They'll be searching there for days." His smile was gone now, replaced by a look of cold, predatory assessment. "You see, we were the ones who heard your call first. Lucky us. Panic, cold, and absolute seized me. These weren't rescuers. They were predators. They'd used our distress signal as a lure. Their motive was terrifyingly unclear. Robbery? Kidnapping? Something worse? The training exercise was a lie. The shortcut was a trap." Mark reacted instantly. He shoved me hard towards a narrow game trail I hadn't even noticed, hidden behind a thicket of manzanita. "Run, Chloe. Get out of here, go!" he yelled, turning to face the three men, pulling the small can of bear spray from his belt. I didn't hesitate. I ran. I heard shouts behind me, the sound of a struggle, Mark's enraged roar, then a sickening thud, followed by a choked cry. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just plunged into the dense woods, branches whipping at my face, tears streaming down my cheeks, the older man's whispered threat echoing in my ears. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs were jelly. I had no idea where I was going, just away, deeper into the wilderness, the sounds of pursuit thankfully fading behind me. Hours later, by some miracle, guided by a distant glimpse of a fire lookout tower, I vaguely remembered seeing on the map. I stumbled onto a marked Forest Service road. A bewildered group of bird watchers found me there, a hysterical, scratched and sobbing mess. The real SAR team, alerted by the bird watchers, found Mark later that evening. He was alive, but barely. Beaten, teed up, left for dead near the Alpine Lake, he said after I ran, and overpowered him quickly. They hadn't been interested in our gear, our wallets. They kept asking him about the package and the drop point, things he knew nothing about. When they realized he was clueless, they'd beaten him senseless and left him. They'd taken our PLB, our phones. The authorities launched a massive manhunt. They found a crude, well-hidden campsite miles from where we'd been, with evidence of long-term occupation, and some disturbing items. A collection of driver's licenses, credit cards, and personal effects belonging to other hikers who had gone into other hikers. Missing in that remote section of the Sierra over the years. The fake rescue team, they theorized, was a sophisticated group of bandits, possibly with ties to drug runners, who used the rugged terrain and the promise of rescue to prey on lost or vulnerable hikers, robbing them, then ensuring they were never found. The rerouted beacon was a chillingly effective tactic. They were never caught. They melted back into the vast wilderness, as elusive as the mountain fog. Mark recovered, physically, but the scars we both carry from that day run far deeper than skin. The wilderness, once our sanctuary, now feels different. Its silence no longer peaceful, but filled with a menacing, watchful presence. I still hike, but never alone, never without multiple layers of communication, never too far from civilization. Because I know that sometimes, when you send out a call for help into the void, you don't know who or what will answer. And sometimes, the people who find you aren't there to save you at all. They're just there because they heard your call first. The vast wilderness of Pisgah National Forest in North Carolina was supposed to be our escape, a place where the stars burned bright and the world felt untamed. My friends and I had set up camp in a remote valley, our tents pitched near a babbling creek, the air thick with the scent of pine and wet earth. It was our first night, and we were laughing over a crackling fire when we heard it. A faint scream, sharp and human, echoing across the valley. I froze, my beer halfway to my lips. Probably just a fox, I thought. Their cries can sound eerily human, but the sound lingered, high and desperate. And as I glanced at my friends, their wide eyes mirrored my own unease. Something felt wrong, like the forest itself was watching us. What was out there screaming in the dark? I'm Alex, a 28-year-old mechanic from Asheville, always chasing adventure with my buddies, Sam and Tara. It was August 2024, and we'd planned a 4-day camping trip to unplug, hike, and drink under the stars. Pisgah was perfect. Miles of dense forest, no cell signal, just us in the wild. Sam, a wiry EMT with a quick laugh, and Tara, a quiet bartender with a knack for navigation, were my ride-or-die crew. We'd camped together before, but this spot felt different, isolated in a way that made the hairs on my neck stand up. The next morning, the scream was just a memory, dulled by sunlight filtering through the pines. But as we cooked breakfast, I noticed something off. Our cooler was moved, dragged a few feet from where we'd left it. Its lid cracked open. Animals? Tara suggested. but her voice was tight. I checked the ground. Scuff marks. Too broad for a bear. More like boots. I shook it off, telling myself it was another camper, maybe scavenging. But when we hiked that afternoon, I kept glancing over my shoulder, feeling eyes on us from the dense underbrush. Sam noticed it too, his usual chatter fading as he scanned the trees. That night, the screams returned, closer now, raw and panicked, like someone begging for help. We sat silent, our fire spitting embers, none of us daring to call out. By the second day, dread settled in. Our firewood was scattered, like someone had kicked it apart. Tara found a knife stuck in a tree near our camp. Its blade rusted but sharp, not ours. "This is messed up," she whispered, her hands trembling as she pulled it free. I wanted to agree, to pack up and leave, but Sam insisted we were overreacting. "It's just kids screwing around," he said, but his eyes darted to the shadows. That night, the screams were louder, almost in the valley, accompanied by a faint rustling, like someone moving through the brush. I gripped my hatchet, my heart pounding. Was I paranoid? I'd heard stories of weirdos in these woods, but this felt too real, too close. On the third morning, we decided to cut the trip short. As we packed, I found it. A crude drawing in the dirt near my tent. A stick figure with X's for eyes, surrounded by jagged lines like a cage. My stomach twisted. "We're leaving. Now," I said, my voice shaking. Tara nodded, but Sam hesitated, staring at the drawing. "This is someone's idea of a joke," he muttered, but he grabbed his pack. We broke camp fast, the forest eerily quiet, the air heavy with the scent of decay. As we hiked out, I heard it again. A scream, so close it raised goosebumps, followed by a low, guttural laugh. I spun around, seeing nothing but trees, but the feeling of being watched was suffocating. We were halfway to the trailhead when a park ranger, a grizzled man named Holt, emerged from the path, his face pale and grim. "You folks need to come with me," he said, his voice low. We found the other campers. My heart sank. He led us to a clearing a mile away where police tape fluttered around a cluster of trees. Two bodies, a man and a woman, lay under tarps, their gear scattered, blood soaking the dirt. "They've been here a couple days," Holt said, his eyes avoiding ours. The woman's hand was visible, pale and rigid, clutching a torn map. I felt sick, realizing the screams we'd heard weren't animals. They were hers. Holt questioned us, his radio crackling as more rangers arrived. We told him everything. The screams, the cooler, the knife, the drawing. He nodded, his jaw tight. "We've had reports of a guy out here, a loner. Calls himself the Trapper. Likes to scare campers, make them feel hunted." My blood ran cold. As we spoke, I caught movement in the trees. A figure, tall and lanky, slipping into the shadows. I pointed, shouting, but he was gone. Holt grabbed his radio, barking orders, but the forest swallowed the figure like it was protecting him. Tara gripped my arm, her face ashen. Sam was silent, his bravado gone. We hiked out with Holt, our steps hurried, the forest pressing in. Every snap of a twig made my pulse spike. I kept seeing that figure in my mind. His silhouette burned into my brain. At the trailhead, police took our statements, their faces grim. They found a camp nearby. Ropes, knives, and a notebook with sketches of stick figures, some labeled with names, including ours. The Trapper, they said, was a drifter, a hunter obsessed with control, using fear to dominate his prey. He'd been linked to missing hikers, but no one had caught him. The screams, they guessed, were his way of luring others, drawing them deeper into his game. We don't camp anymore. The wilderness, once our playground, feels like a trap now. Feels like a trap now. Tara moved to Charlotte. Says she can't stand the sound of crickets. Sam drinks too much. Jumps at shadows. I'm back in Asheville. But I sleep with a bat by my bed. Check my locks twice. Old calls sometimes. Updating me on the case, but the Trapper's still out there. A ghost in the woods. I see those bodies in my dreams. Hear those screams echoing in my head. The police say he's probably moved on, targeting another forest, another group of campers. But last night, I found a stick figure scratched into my doorstep. Its X's for eyes staring up at me, and I swear I heard a faint scream in the distance, calling me back to the wild.